For the nematode notes, which are roundworms. So nematodes comes from the word comes from the name nematos, which means thread. The common name for nematodes is roundworms because they have a round body, as opposed to platyhelminthes or flatworms, they have a flat body. Right? They are considered unsegmented worms, and they're one of the most abundant types of worms in the world, with 12,000 species named, and there's estimated to be half a million species worldwide yet to be discovered. They do live in a variety of habitats, including fresh and salt water in the soil, as well as all the way from the poles to the equator. So they're pretty much in all kinds of climates. So just for example, in good topsoil, it may contain billions of nematodes per acre, and they're parasites to basically every type of plant and animal. So they can infect a lot of stuff. All right. Most average to be about 5 centimeters in length, which is approximately 2 inches. However, they range in size from being microscopic to some being almost a meter in length, which is kind of terrifying when you think about it. Right? Their body form for now we're moving on to anatomy. So their body form is considered a pseudoclone, which means false clone. This basically means they have a body cavity, and your body cavity is like where all your organs are. So theirs isn't a true body cavity, but it's like almost there. All right. So down here we have the comparison, and all three worm phylums are like a separate category. So there's the ones with like no body cavity. There's ones with kind of a body cavity, and then there's ones with a true body cavity. Right. Their digestive tract has 2 openings. So now we're finally in a category of animals with two ends to their digestive system. And they have bilateral symmetry, and they have cephalization. That term means they distinctly have a head in their body, in their body, all right, or on their body. All right. For movement, for locomotion, nematodes move by using fluid pressure generated in their pseudoclone. This fluid-filled chamber that provides structure and locomotion is called a hydrostatic skeleton. So hydrostatic skeletons work by transferring the force of muscular contractions to a non-compressible fluid like hydraulic fluid pressure. The pressure is confined by a thick elastic cuticle made of collagen. All right. So they have longitudinal muscles that work against the outer cuticle like a spring. When the longitudinal muscle contracts, the cuticle on the opposite side is stretched out. When the muscle relaxes, the cuticle relaxes, and the body cavity returns to its original shape. This does cause the movement of nematodes to be very erratic, especially when you're like comparing it to like a earthworm where they move kind of smoothly. These guys just kind of wiggle around kind of spastically, right? This is just a cross section of what their body cavities look like. You don't need to know any of the labels on here, but if you're just really curious of what the inside of a roundworm looks like when it's cut like that direction, there you go. So moving on to the digestive system. The digestive system of nematodes is technically considered complete, but it is very simple, especially when we're comparing it to like mammals and stuff. So their digestive system consists of a mouth, a pharynx, an intestines, rectum, and anus. All right. For feeding, many are going to be free-living nematodes, and they're carnivores, and they'll feed on animals that are even smaller than them, including eating other nematodes. Some will eat sediment and then digest associated bacteria and or organic material in the soil or the sediment. But many are parasites and do require a host to survive. Okay. For their nervous system, nematode nervous system consists of a ring-shaped ganglia, which ganglia is not technically a brain, but we're like on our way there to having a brain. So it's just like nerves, a bunch of nerves together. So it's at the anterior end of the body, and it connects to 2 nerve cords that run the length of the body. And then some nematodes will have eye spots to detect light. They won't all have it, but some will. Right. For reproduction, nematodes are deciduous, and as a reminder, that means males and females are separate. They're separate. All right. They do exhibit sexual dimorphism, which is when there's a clear distinction when looking at the species to determine the male and the female. Like it's easy to identify. So males are going to usually be smaller than the females. And typically it's because the female has all those eggs in her. So females can deposit over 100,000 eggs per day. And fertilization, it is internal, and eggs are stored in a uterus. And eggs are deposited by the female, and then the embryo will develop, and the juvenile hatches from the egg. There are 4 4 juvenile stages, and each juvenile stage is separated by a molting or shedding of the cuticle. Just some scientific importance involving nematodes. There was research on C. elegans, which was the very first organism to ever have its DNA completely sequenced. It's a very simple, free-living roundworm, and this is a picture of it, but that was a huge milestone in the scientific community to completely sequence an organism's DNA. All right, moving on. I'm sorry, just a warning on the next several slides. There are some gross pictures. It just is with parasites. All right. So, nematode parasites. The first one is Ascaris lumbricoides. I hope I'm saying that wrong. If not, thankfully, you don't have to pronounce things correctly on your test. So, this is a common name for human intestinal roundworm. It's one of the most common worms that's found in humans. The females can grow up to 30 centimeters long, so that's about a foot. And the females will produce up to 200,000 eggs per day. The adults will live in the small intestines, and the eggs will leave the host body within the feces. The Ascaris is a common infection in developing countries that lack the widespread modern sanitation practices like we have in first world countries. They infect a person's small intestines and then acts as a parasite, getting nutrients from its host intestinal tract. And many people with these worms don't even experience any symptoms until the infection has really become severe. Right? So worms for these are extremely resistant to harsh conditions other than direct sunlight and high temperatures. They can survive in soil for months and sometimes even years. When the eggs are consumed, they hatch in the host intestines and penetrate the intestinal wall to reach the host bloodstream. Right? Then, after reaching the bloodstream, they'll make their way into the lungs, and once the worms reach the lung, the host can develop a serious case of pneumonia. So, after the juvenile worms are coughed up, they're then swallowed by the digestive tract and make their way back to the intestines where they become sexually mature. And then large numbers of the adults cause intestinal blockage and severe abdominal pain. So, they just kind of go through this cycle as they're taking over. All right. Moving on, the next one is hookworms, and hookworms get their name from the anterior end, which is curved like a hook. And there's some close-up photos, and they're just kind of funny looking to me. So they'll burrow their hook mouth into the intestines of humans and suck blood. It can cause anemia in people and can delay mental and physical growth in children and cause a loss of energy. The life cycle of these guys and transmission is very similar to the ascarid worm that we just mentioned on the last slide. So same kind of deal, so we won't rehash that. Here's some pictures of hookworms that have migrated near the skin of people. All right. Then there's trichinella spirosis, which is responsible for a potentially fatal disease called trichinosis. The females do produce live young instead of eggs, and the juveniles will penetrate skeletal muscles where they'll burrow and develop into cysts in the muscle tissue and they become what are called nerve cells. The transmission occurs when meat from an animal containing nerve cells is ingested, and the juvenile worms are liberated into the intestine where they mature. Symptoms of these worms is terrible pain in muscles, and it's going to be unexplained pain. Like if you just hit the gym and worked out a lot, you're obviously going to have sore muscles and everything from your workout. This would be pain that's just unexplained and has nothing else to it. All right. So here's just a graphic that shows this. So the larvae of undercooked meats are consumed. They're released from the nerve cells in that food into the stomach, and then they make their way into the small intestines where the adults mature and live within the small intestines. The females will shed newborn larvae that will enter the lymph or blood, which lymph is dealing with your immune system. So they'll then be carried out throughout the bloodstream. They could make their way to your heart or your brain and cause damage there, but they could also enter your skeletal muscles and then make new nerve cells in your muscles, which is going to cause you pain because that's something that shouldn't be there, and cycle through it. All right. Next up, we have pinworms. They cause a few symptoms, but they're the most common worm parasite in the U.S. It's estimated that 30% of children and 16% of adults have pinworms or have had them in the U.S. Adults, pinworms will live in the large intestines, and the females migrate to the anal region of the human host at night to lay eggs. Then the human will scratch the contaminants with their hands, they get on the bed sheets, and it can spread. So then the eggs can then be transmitted and swallowed, and they're white in color and generally less than half an inch long. All right. Next up is filarial worms. About 250 million people are infected worldwide, and mostly in tropical countries. They cause an obstruction and inflammation of the lymphatic system, and mosquitoes can carry these guys and carry the disease, and extreme manifestations of this can cause elephantitis, which is what you're seeing in these pictures. All right, elephantitis is a condition caused by the swelling of certain parts of the body, such as the legs, arms, and genitals. Right? Not something you really want. So, and then lastly, another filarial worm is the heartworm. So, for your pets, they are carried and transmitted by mosquitoes, and they can also infect cats, ferrets, sea lions, and occasionally even humans. So, for instance, this picture isn't great quality here, even outside of being in a video. So, we have here adult worms will reproduce, and by about 6 months, they could be found in the blood. And so, mosquitoes will ingest the blood infected with the worms from an infected dog. They develop the larval form within the mosquito, and then the infected larva will enter a new host. So, like, one dog has heartworms, gets bit, the worms develop in the mosquito then bites another dog, and then that dog gets the worms in it, and then the larva will migrate to the right side of the heart and develop into adult worms there, and then the cycle can repeat itself. So you always want to make sure that you treat your dogs for heartworms if they've got them, and do prevention and make sure you're taking care of them, being a responsible pet owner. Anyway, so that is the end of these notes. Let me know if you ever have any questions about them.